Good morning, everyone. I'm Tessa Davies, the Director of Communications and Events at VIATEC. I want to welcome you all to Mentorship Magic, How Generosity Builds Unstoppable Tech Communities, with Boulder, Colorado resident, renowned entrepreneur and investor, and author of Give First, The Power of Mentorship, Brad Feld. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brad.
It's my
We're,
pleasure. Happy to
we're
be.
thrilled you could take the time during your book tour.
Well, as
It,
I wander the earth, I'm happy to be able to do things like this by video.
And where in the earth are you now?
I am in San Francisco proper today for 2 days. I have a keynote tonight at the National Venture Capital Association has a program called Venture Forward, which is they're nonprofit focused on getting more women and underrepresented men into the venture capital industry. It's a 5-year anniversary. I was one of the initial funders. And so we're having the 5-year anniversary event, and I'm doing a keynote. And then tomorrow I'm at an event on Google's campus for an organization called Illumin, which used to be called Him for Her. And it's the largest network of board-ready women in the world. So it's about 15,000 women who are either on private or public company boards or board ready. And if anybody on this call is interested in that organization, either because you're looking for a board member or you are interested in being a board member, feel free to drop me an email at brad@feld.com, and I'll plug into that organization.
Perfect. So I'm just going to put your email in chat here. Brad at feld.com.
feld.com. There you go.
Great.
Anyway, so that's what I'm in San Francisco for. And then, the travels go on. Next week, Techstars is having their annual FounderCon event, which is going to be in Boulder this year. It hasn't been in Boulder for a decade, so that'll be fun. It moves around the world, but David Cohen, the CEO of Techstars, decided to do this year's in Boulder. And
Convenient.
it overlaps with something called Colorado Startup Week, which is the largest startup week in the world, started in 2013 by a guy named Derek Matisek, and has inspired a lot of other startup weeks. So, just a lot of hanging out with people in between doing real work.
That's awesome. What a life. I hope you get to relax at some point in between that all, but
Eventually.
it sounds very exciting. Okay, so I'm going to be asking Brad a series of questions, and then we'll open up the Q&A box at the end for all of you to ask some questions. And as a thank you for attending today, not just for registering, for attending, VIATEC's going to be purchasing a copy of Brad's book for each and every single one of you. And you'll be contacted once they arrive to Fort Victoria to either pick them up or we'll send them to you if you're not in the area. Okay, so let's get into it. First burning question. So we like to say that Victoria is a magnetic city. The combination of quality of work and quality of life attract people looking for more than a paycheck through our shared values of openness, community, and a sense of belonging. If you were to sketch out a one-page Give First playbook for Victoria, what 3 practices would you put at the very top? And how should leaders here hold themselves accountable?
So let me define Give First, because I think that's an important starting point.
Yeah.
And I want to define it very much making sure everybody understands that it's a philosophy, not a religion. A religion is a set of rules that you follow, and if you follow the rules, depending on what your religious tradition is, good things theoretically happen. A philosophy is not a set of rules, and you don't get a grade and you don't get judged. It's much more like a set of ideas to try to incorporate into some aspect of the way that you approach life. And for me, Give First has been a guiding philosophy of how I've engaged with lots of different types of things, whether they're organizations or people, over a long period of time. The definition of give first is that you're willing to put energy into a system without defining upfront what you're going to get out of the system. It's not altruistic. You expect to get something, but you just don't know when, from whom, over what time period, in what consideration, and in what magnitude. So that's kind of, if you think about it, it's kind of a magical way to approach things. Now, it's not, again, set of rules. You don't do it 100% of the time. I have lots of people joke with me in different ways. My favorite of the jokes is, "Oh, you're that give first venture capitalist. Why don't you give me 5 million bucks? And when I have some success, I'll just give you what." It's like, no, no, no. There are transactional aspects to everything we do. But if you go back to, and in the startup communities book, over hiding in the wall over Tessa's uh,
Right here.
right shoulder, which I wrote in 2012, there's a small section, one paragraph in that book called "Give Before You Get." It was kind of an afterthought. It was not like a central core part of the book. And I wrote the paragraph because I was trying to give people some sense of how to get a startup community really moving. And if you're willing to put energy in without knowing what you're going to get out, and you can get everybody around the startup community doing that, all of a sudden some really magical things start to happen. So that was where that idea came from. Now, give before you get is a not particularly effective hashtag in Twitter, and when Twitter used to be 140 characters. So somebody at Techstars turned it into give first, a guy named Greg Cochran. And that's where that label came from. Now, in terms of applying it, right, this idea of being willing to put energy into Victoria and pick your dimension of it. It could be the startup community. It could be other things. Like, again, it's not a rule-based approach, but you're willing to put energy into, let's pick the startup community, without knowing what you're going to get back. And there's really kind of three ideas mixed together in this philosophy. The first is the idea of non-transactional behavior. Transactional behavior is very well understood. We've gotten a recent, in the last 12 months, resurgence of experience with that in a geopolitical sense, where everything is a transaction. I hope all of the people listening are still friendly to me as an American, after all of the transactional
Of
nonsense
course.
from my frame of reference that's been going on. And I'm simplistic about it. I'll be quasi non-political in this conversation, but in America, we have two jerseys. You either have a red jersey or a blue jersey. I unapologetically wear my blue jersey. But at the same time, like, the leadership behavior that's been modeled here, again, geopolitically, not just by the United States most recently, has been very transactional. So concept number one is non-transactional. You're willing to just engage. You don't have to say, "I'll do this for you if you give me this," or "if we define this," or "this kind of a deal will happen." It's like, nope, I'm happy to engage. The second is this idea of positive sum. And I think this is a really important idea that is not as well understood. There's a phrase that I think now has become a cliche. I don't like it. I view it as kind of sales and marketing language rather than sort of true value, which is this idea of win-win. And when somebody says to me, "I'm developing a win-win-win relationship," I mostly just want to run and scream and hide. Like, it just makes me really nervous. Like, what's going to happen here?
And roll your eyes.
And roll my eyes. Roll even better. Um, Win-win. Okay, put it aside. Think of positive sum. Positive sum is both parties benefit, but not equally. So it's not that it has to be an equivalent win-win. It's that what you're doing and engaging with the system is having a positive sum experience. Both parties benefit.
Mhm.
And that's really, for me, so powerful because, again, if you link this back to this idea of you don't know where the benefit comes from, the benefits don't have to be aligned either in magnitude or time. And so, again, you approach this with a give first philosophy. And the last is what I like to refer to as a multi-turn game versus a single turn game. People who are video gamers know this. Multi-turn game, you have multiple times that you engage with somebody over time, over and over and over again. And some of the experiences might not be successful. And in fact, in entrepreneurship, many of the experiences might not be successful. A lot of the interactions might result in something that doesn't really generate meaningful, positive sum interaction. It kind of didn't work. But that's okay because you're playing a multi-turn game versus a single turn game. So it sort of stands in contrast to this idea of transactional zero sum, where one person wins and the other person loses, and zero sum kind of implies that the values of win and lose are equivalent, and
Mhm.
single turn. So I like that approach as the inverse of that. And as you link it back to your community, if you think about those sorts of things, whatever the dimension that you pick, this idea of engaging non-transactionally, of viewing those interactions where you're searching for positive sum, benefit for both parties. Both parties are looking for benefit for both parties. And multi-turn, where you're engaging in something over a long period of time. I think that's how you apply it.
Amazing. And I will add that even when Canadians say elbows up, we're probably wearing elbow pads. So it's all good there. Okay, so here in Victoria, the tech sector now drives close to $8 billion a year in economic impact,
That's
and
fantastic.
and
Congrats.
it supports more than 20,000 jobs. Little tidbit. So, from your perspective, what's the most credible way to connect those big outcomes back to the small human behaviors like mentorship and openness that Give First is all about? And what can we do to make that link visible to the broader community and the government?
Yeah, there's two really powerful things here that are fun. One is there's a word, and I'll build off of this, called topophilia. And I learned this word from John Hickenlooper, who's was at the time governor of Colorado. He's now one of the Colorado senators, and he was an entrepreneur. If you like craft beer, John was one of the founders of the craft brewing industry 40 years ago or something like that.
Oh, we love craft beer in Victoria.
There you go. So, anybody that's having a microbrew, think of topophilia. Topophilia means love of place. And I'm going to bet that most of the people on this call that live in Victoria have love of place. You love Victoria,
We're obsessed.
right? You chose to live there. It's where you live. It's where you want to live. It's where you want to build a life. I have topophilia for Colorado. I moved to Colorado 30 years ago randomly. My wife, Amy, told me that she was moving to Boulder and I could come with her. And when I say my wife, we'd been married for a while. And we were
So
living in Boston at the time. And we had never, when we moved to Boulder, we didn't know anybody. We knew one person. He moved away 6 months later. So we moved to build a life in Boulder, not for a job, not for family, not for any other reasons, but because that's where we wanted to be. So if you think about topophilia, if you're a founder of a company in Victoria that's a tech company, or you're an early employee and you end up having success, and that success generates wealth, and you love Victoria, a powerful thing to do is to reinvest your money and time, not all your money, but some of your money and some of your time back into the startup community, the tech community. And the interesting thing about this, I was at an event yesterday and the day before in Aspen, called the Aspen Venture Summit. It was the first year that they had it. It was about 50 founders and about 50 investors, mostly from not Colorado, plus then all the Colorado investors. And we were having a 2 day event, 1.5 day event, sort of talking about Colorado. And the kickoff to the event was a talk from me and Jared Polis. Jared is now governor of Colorado. He's co-founder with me of Techstars. He's also founder of a number of other companies. If anybody remembers, is old enough to remember the internet bubble, He founded with his family BlueMountainArts.com, which was the very popular greeting card site. He also founded a company called ProFlowers.com, which was an online delivery flower company that went public. And he and I have been good friends. He was one of the very first people I met when I moved to Boulder. So we've been good friends for a long time. And so we did a kickoff um, the night before that was kind of a walk down memory lane. It was going back to when, again, I mentioned earlier, I'm about 60. I turned 60 in December. We went back to when I was in about 30 and Jared was early 20s in the
Mhm.
mid 90s in Boulder, and sort of the evolution of Boulder from the mid 90s to today. And one of the things that was interesting, somebody said, when do you think it sort of crossed over from a point where there was not enough critical mass and where there were a couple of people who were the ones that were sort of running everything, or everything went through them? They didn't run everything, but they were like the leaders that everybody saw. And I was one of those leaders. So I'd be careful with the language. I most definitely didn't run everything, but lots and lots of things came through me. If somebody was coming to Colorado that was interested in entrepreneurship, um, I was on their list. I got an email from them. They wanted to have coffee with me. If I said yes to everything, all I'd ever do is have coffee and go to the bathroom, and that wasn't a very satisfying way to live. Um, and kind of my view was it was around 2014, 2015, so about 20 years. We had three companies. We had plenty of companies be successful pre-internet bubble, in the internet bubble, then lots of challenges post-internet bubble and financial crisis and da 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 da. But companies kept getting built, and there was a moment in about 12-month period in around 2014 where three companies went public. Zayo, which was started in 2007, SendGrid, which was started in 2010, and was a Techstars company, and then Rally Software, which was probably started around 2004, 2005, and I was an early investor in that company. Those three companies went public in Boulder, and suddenly, not just the founders had a lot of wealth, but a lot of employees had a lot of wealth. And it
Mhm.
really then activated another level of what was happening around startups because as a year or two passed, all of those people started to become angel investors. Now they had the experience of being through that arc of real success. And when they became angel investors, sure, they invested in various different things, but they invested a lot locally back into companies that helped them generate some of
Fantastic.
their wealth and success. And so I think that's kind of piece number one, which is this idea of if you have topophilia, and it's not just money, right? It's money, time, leadership, energy back into your local community. Um, the other is this very important thing, and you sort of ask this question of how do we get other people to recognize what's happening, understand what's happening? For me, I have this strong belief that a startup community is an important aspect of every city in the world. And when I wrote that first Startup Communities book in 2012, I sort of made this assertion that any city with at least 50,000 people should have a vibrant startup community, not as the only thing, but as part of the city. Just like you have, an arts district or arts museum, symphony, opera, so whatever the arts is, you have whatever the educational dynamics are, you have whatever environmental conservation. I mean, Boulder's magnificent because we've got, mountains and running trails and bike trails and all kinds of open space that the city and the county and the state over the years have protected. I'm sure, again, it's been a while since I was in Victoria, but I'm sure Victoria has its own beauty, natural beauty that people care about, that they protect. So you think of the multiple things in the community that are key parts of it. An innovation economy is a key part of it, a startup community being that thing that's very
Yeah.
accessible. And the power of that is helping people in the rest of the community understand what's going on. So I'll just give an example from Omaha, Nebraska. And this is probably from 2014 or 15. I gave a talk at a big event called Big Omaha, which was their startup event. It was probably 500 or 600 people. And so I spent 2 days in Omaha, and I was on stage and gave this big, this talk, a fireside chat at the end of the event. And it was really fun and interesting, met a lot of people and, engaged for a while. And at the end of the event, as they're doing Q&A, a young woman gets up and from the back of the room says, "Brad, this is very nice. Everything you said sounds optimistic and fun and great. Well, we have a problem here in Omaha." And I said, "Okay, what's the problem?" They said, "Well, there's no money here." And I said, "I'm in Omaha, right?" Yes. I said, "Doesn't Warren Buffett live here?" And it doesn't Kiewit, which was another company that's an Omaha-based company that generated a large number of billionaires in Omaha, isn't that based here? And like at the moment in time, I don't know whether the statistic is true or not, but a decade ago, Omaha was one of the highest concentration of billionaires in the United States in a city because of Berkshire Hathaway and Kiewit and all the people that had invested in those companies or had bought shares very early as those companies built huge amounts of wealth. And it got a couple of chuckles. But I said, I'm not making fun of the problem. I understand the problem. The trick is you have to train people who don't naturally think of startups and the startup community as a key part of the engine of a city to
Hmm.
be a key part of the engine of the city. I said, I had the night before, they have this new thing called the river. It's either riverfront or river walk. I can't remember, but it was a beautiful redevelopment on the river, that runs through town. And I said, in the same way that must have cost $100 million, $200 million of philanthropic giving from people in the community, the same idea of investing in startups early as angel investors and helping create this sort of startup community dynamic that then leads to this innovation part of your city, which, by the way, attracts next generation, keeps people living in the city. Obviously, 20,000 jobs generates lots of jobs, but also generates kind of an energy around new and different and exciting and
Yeah.
creative and like as I rolled through this story, there was a lot of head nodding all of a sudden. People got it. I said, you can't expect the people in your community that love your community that don't know anything about tech to naturally understand what to do to be helpful. You just can't. You have to
Hmm.
teach them. You have to train them. You have to advocate, and you have to advocate for a long period of time. Now, again, in that moment in 2013 or 2014 in Boulder, which again, 20 years later, all of a sudden there was this very visible impact of it. And the impact wasn't just that you had a bunch of people that had a bunch of money and bought big houses and new fancy cars. But all of a sudden, you had a new generation of people in the city that were giving money back philanthropically. I have a phrase in the Give First book. It's the fourth part of the book called entrepreneurial tzedakah. And tzedakah is an ancient Hebrew word that means righteousness, but is often translated as charity. And the philosopher Maimonides, who was a 10th century Hebrew philosopher, came up with this idea of 8 levels of tzedakah. And the highest level of tzedakah is that you give somebody something before they know they need it to help them be self-sufficient. And for me, that was kind of the essence of angel investing, right?
Hmm.
You're
Totally.
you're giving some, my own personal joke, I'll end on this, but my personal joke around that was when I encountered that idea. My wife Amy and I love to read. We lay on the couch. She lays on her couch. I lay on my couch, and we read books at night. And I remember saying to Amy, uh, uh, as I encountered this, I said, "Holy shit, Maimonides' top level of tzedakah is angel investing." And she looked at me like, I had just been dropped off from my trip to Mars. Like, what are you talking about? But it generated a very interesting conversation. So it's like that's the second part for you, which is this idea
Yeah.
of the long-term impact that results from this kind of activity.
And going stemming off of that, we had a question that just popped up from the group. How do you balance that mentality when you work within a very large global company? So say you're a local leader, you want to do more good for your community, but you're in this corporate world. You're going about your own corporate business. You're a global company. How do you maintain that mentality?
Yeah, so there's probably a couple of different flavors to that question. So I'll answer at least two different pieces of it. One is in the context of your job and your company, independent of your community, you're going to subscribe to the norms of that large company, whatever those norms are. So the norms might be that the large company you work for cares about the different geographies they have employees in. The norms might be that they don't. If they don't, there's not much you can do about that in the context of the global organization. But if the norms are that they care about the communities in which they operate, which a lot of large corporations do,
Mhm.
figuring out how to be a bridge in your community between the corporation and activities and events that are interesting to you, that are things you would want to spend your time on, that might or might not directly help the large corporation, but indirectly will always help, because when you're a representative wearing the shirt of the large corporation, supporting things in your local community, whether they're in the startup community or in the arts or in other aspects of it, that's a very powerful message. And in a lot of ways, the reason that I think about Boulder, the reason that we have some national organizations, I'll just pick one. Google has a large office in Boulder that emerged from an acquisition. They bought a 50-person company 20 years ago. And today, I think they have something like 2,000 people that work in Boulder, which is, a 100,000 person city. So it's a very big percentage of the population that now works for Google. Google and people from Google provide both functional and financial support for many different organizations in Boulder. And that is the best advertising Google can buy, because they're contributing back to their organization. And if all they did was write checks, that's good, but it's not just write checks. It's people show up, people engage, people participate. So that's one.
Yeah.
The other is, and I made a mistake in the first edition of Startup Communities, the one on Tessa's right shoulder.
Right here.
It's so funny. It's fun to watch it. Um, and I fixed this in the second edition. And in the first edition, I separated the world into what I called leaders and feeders. And I said the entrepreneurs are the leaders, everybody else is a feeder. And that construct was right, but I made a mistake. And the mistake was I created a one up, one down relationship between leaders and feeders just by nature of the words. And it generated a lot of humor over the years. And I think people got it. And, I kind of talked it through. But really, it was that I didn't separate people and organizations, which comes to the heart of your question. So in the second edition, I talk about leaders have to be founders, or another category that we call instigators. And then the feeders are organizations. Instigators are people who work for organizations that play a leadership role in the startup community. So the leaders are, again, are founders and instigators. And so I separated people from organization. The organizations can't be the leader. It has to be people. And so if
Hmm.
you're in a large organization and whether it's directly part of your job because you work for the part of the organization that links to startup communities or links to innovation or links to technology or whatever, or whether it's just something that you personally are interested in, showing up as an instigator and providing leadership in the startup community, again, you have to subscribe to the norms of your whatever the organization is. You have a job, you have an employer, but if those norms include this idea of supporting local, whatever that means, then you can be an instigator, you can be a leader in the startup community. And just to sort of tie it up, remember, it's not in the philosophy of give first, I say you're going to get something back. You just don't know when, from whom, over what time period, in what form, in what consideration. So it's very hard to quantify not just the amount, but the type of benefit you're going to get. You have to be comfortable with the idea that that benefit is not going to be easily categorizable. It's one of the challenges in startup communities, but in many other things. In the book, The Startup Community Way, which was essentially the second book that was linked to the Startup Communities book, I have a chapter that I wrote with the co-author. The book was Dina Hathaway. It's chapter 11. It's called the Measurement Trap. And this challenge of so many things where people want to measure things to be able to demonstrate, look, I put something in and this is what I'm getting out. And there's certainly value to that, but also you have to be able to suspend that. You have to be able to separate from that in terms of how you engage.
And I feel like the instigators have to really, they're taking the initiative. They have to really step out and be and commit. And we see that a lot with our VIATEC members. We have all of these organizations that become members, and there's a handful of the individuals from those companies who really show up and participate, and they have a foot in the door here at VIATEC, and they're the ones acting as the bridge. When we see some of those instigators leave for another company or retire, you are having to build up those relationships again and maintain that. So
That's right.
I love that definition. So thank you for
Mhm.
clarifying. Okay, one question here that's relatable. Uh, Sometimes you give something before they need it, and in the fullness of time, they underestimate the value or impact of that gift. Do you have any suggestions for being magnanimous while ensuring that the recipient appreciates the help so that they adopt giving first themselves going forward?
It's um it's a fun question. Um, so let me differentiate give first from pay it forward because it sort of links to pay it forward.
Hmm.
And pay it forward's a cousin concept, but I've never liked pay it forward for some reason. It took me a long time to understand why I didn't like it. The reason I don't like it is because it has a transactional element to it. Somebody once paid it forward to me. Somebody once did something for me. Now I need to pay it forward for somebody else. And for me, that generated an obligatory dynamic. And I didn't want that obligatory dynamic. I didn't want it that you had to pay it forward. And so, in a lot of ways, some of the beauty of this non-transactionally is that you don't have to define up front what's going to happen with the other person. Now, the skeptical or the cynical part of that is, well, so I'm going to be a giver and other people will be takers. And that's how do I get them to be givers as well? How do I get them to have the same philosophy? And there's a magnificent book that came out about 6 months after Startup Communities by a guy named Adam Grant. Um, it was really powerful to me because if you've read Startup Communities, it's just anecdotes, it's just storytelling, it's just stuff from my own experience. There's no academic research in it. In Adam's book, Adam's an organizational psychologist at Wharton, and in his book titled "Give and Take," he actually did a ton of research, and he defined three categories of people: givers, matchers, and takers. Pretty self-evident what they are, right? Givers are people
Hmm.
who lead by giving, takers are people who lead by taking, and matchers are I'll match. I'll give you this if you give me that, right? The kind of quid pro quo dynamic that exists in a lot of people's thinking. And what Adam discovered, and he did it in a really wonderful way with a twist in the book, is he kind of ended on a chapter with something near the beginning of the book with a story where the giver, a guy named David Hornick, sort of looks like he kind of lost by being a giver, right? kind of financially, transactionally, like kind of lost. And Adam's ending was, my research shows that the people who um, get the least benefit or lose the most are people who take a giving mentality. So like on the spectrum, they're at the bottom. And then you turn the page and he says, and the people who gain the most are the people with the giving mentality.
Hmm.
And so you have this sort of spectrum where you're at both ends of the spectrum. And, takers, matchers end up actually doing better over the long period of time than takers, and takers are, sort of in that zone. So this interesting thing where givers over a long period of time both benefit the most and benefit the least if you measure an individual transaction. And it's really the arc over a long period of time. And so the challenge for somebody that approaches things with this philosophy is one, it's a part of what you do, not all of what you do, right? It's a way you're willing to engage, but it's not the only way that you engage. When you find that you're engaging with a taker and that taker is continually taking, you don't have to keep engaging with them. You have no obligation to do that. You also have no obligation to continue to give first in that context. If somebody is just taking and taking and taking, you'd say, look, all right, I'm going to change my relationship with you.
Canadians might be too polite about it, but
Well, and they might be polite about it, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong being polite about it. Well, internally, you're like, you know what? I'm being taken advantage of here. This doesn't feel good to me.
hmm.
And so this is the key difference between these two concepts of pay it forward, where there was this sort of obligatory transactional component to it. It was also a later in life thing, right? Someone once did something for me, therefore I now feel like I need to pay it forward. Whereas you just show up saying, all right, I'm willing to engage. Let's see where this thing goes. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know what I'm going to get out of it, but let's see where it goes. And so in that construct, like having a different philosophical approach, and to Adam's research, over a long period of time, those people that show up with that giving approach are the ones who benefit the most.
Excellent. And Ian just asked, what is the most common unhelpful pitfall that you see mentors in the community fall into?
Telling people what to do. You
Yeah.
should.
Uh-huh.
One of all of y'all are going to give first the book. I hope some of you enjoy it. If you enjoy it, do all the wonderful things that an author appreciates. Tell people about it. Post on social, post on Goodreads or Amazon or whatever. If you don't like it, throw it away and don't tell anybody. But what you'll get from it is that uh, an important thing, and there's multiple different elements of what's woven through the book. We use something called the Techstars Mentor Manifesto, not to say here are the rules of mentorship, but to create a bunch of discussions and chapters around ideas of how to be effective as a mentor. And a big part of that is this idea of guide, don't control, right? You're guiding the mentee through a thought process. Is that as a mentor, your data, you're providing data, you're not saying the answer. And this idea of saying you should, you should, you should. I mean, anybody who is a parent or has a parent, which is probably almost everybody, if your parent says to you, you should, you immediately start thinking about how to do something else. If you say to your kid, you should, sometimes it's effective, but a lot of the times it's not. That if you're in a mentor-mentee relationship and you're talking to a founder, you are one piece of data, but you might not be right. And they're talking to multiple other people. And if you say, look, this is data, this is from my own experience, these are lessons I've learned, these are the way I think about things, but it's just data. And then as the mentee makes a decision to do something, even if they ignore your data and completely choose to do something else, as a mentor, you're still supporting them. And so this idea of being directive, of trying to tell somebody what they should do, is probably, in Ian's question, the sort of top level of the mistake. Another thing that I'll add as sort of a second version of that is that then flips people into um, a problem that has two pieces to it. One is it's very valuable to be Socratic and to ask questions. That's guiding somebody, but you're guiding them somewhere. You're not just asking questions randomly. You're trying to get to the root cause of the problem because most of the time when someone has a problem, their immediate response is not the root cause. And so you're trying to help them get deeper into whatever the problem is
Hmm.
through the questions. But if the questions are just random, or they're trying to show that you're the smartest person in the room, or you're not really fully engaged in paying attention, it doesn't guide the person anywhere. It doesn't lead to anything. It doesn't help you get to the root cause. The other side of that is that the most powerful examples are things one has experienced. So they're stories and data from your own experience, and they're presented as not this is the answer because I had this and it worked, or I did this and it didn't work. Well, that was your experience. That might not be the canonical truth of what happens when you encounter that kind of thing. So presenting it as my experience rather than the answer is kind of a second part of that problem, which is okay, I'm not going to say you should, but I'm going to say, all right, well, here's how this works. Well, maybe, maybe not. Like it worked that way once for you.
Hmm.
Tell that story and then let the mentee interpret the story and understand what to do with it against the backdrop of whatever she's facing.
And by telling that story, being vulnerable with telling that story, is that
Totally.
helpful?
Absolutely. Vulnerable with both the positives and negatives. If you show up and everything that you've ever done has been a success and you've always been awesome, and you've never struggled with anything. Well, number one, okay, maybe, but probably not. And number two, is that really helping the person on the other side who is in a situation where they're struggling with something? And so, being accessible to the mentee is also very powerful. My view, pretty simply, is that life and not just entrepreneurship, but life is an endless series of experiments. You have a hypothesis, you try something. Most of the time, it doesn't work. You learn from that. You create another hypothesis, do another experiment. Now, we all know people who believe that they are never wrong, who believe they are infallible, who present themselves where it's impossible to challenge them. And there's public figures that behave that way. There's leaders that behave that way. There's lots of people in lots of places that behave that way. For me, like I generally, when somebody behaves that way with regard to some issue with me, I view that person as being very uncomfortable with themselves, being insecure, not being able to confront the fact that, many of the things that they're doing don't make any sense or aren't right. For me, I made a ton of mistakes. I've had a lot of things fail. Those are all, it's not cliche. Those are all just other experiences during this journey of life. And they're wasted if I don't learn something from it. Even the ones that are really heartbreaking, even the ones that are really challenging. If you're a mentor, like there's so much juice in those experiences when you're seeing a mentee go through some of that stuff and to relate to them from the standpoint of being on the other side of the stress and strain and challenge of that particular situation.
Failure sucks, but instructs. That's what we like to say with fuck up nights.
I like the line.
So on the theme of failure, you've been very open about your experience with Interalliance failure,
Yeah.
previous company. Um, one second here, just skipped my question here. So how did that period influence your thinking about mentorship and building resilient startup communities?
Yeah. Well, for people that don't know the Interlion story, you'll read about it in Give First because it's the lead off story in the book. But it was a company I started in 1996 with a guy named Len Fassler who bought my first company. He and a guy named Jerry Pock were partners, co-founders of a company that bought my first company. And that's how I got to know both of them. Len and I went and started a couple of companies together subsequently. Interliant was one of them. And it was a company that went from nothing to a couple $100 million business in a public company very quickly in 3 years. We had a lot of, I mean, it was a crazy time because of the internet bubble. There's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of good things and bad things along the way, but we built a really significant business very, very quickly. Um, Went public, and at the peak, it was worth about $3 billion. And in 2002, the company went bankrupt. So it was pretty painful. This sort of ride up was amazing but stressful, and then this ride down was just excruciatingly painful. Um, and Len was a little bit over 30 years older than me, so he was an amazing mentor of mine. And in mentorship, there's this magic trick when you become peers. So instead of mentor mentee, you both become peers. And that happened reasonably early in our relationship. And it was a wonderful moment. I won't use the time on the story because I'll stay on the Inner Lion story. But by the time that we were in distress, we had definitely shifted our relationship where even though he was 30 something years older than me, it was a peer relationship. And um, one of the things, a couple of things came out of it. One was one of my favorite lines when you're really under stress in a business context. And that line from Len was one morning when I was really sort of just dragging. I was not in a good place. I knew it was going to be a terrible day. And then we were at breakfast, and he looked at me and he says, "Brad, they can't kill you and they can't eat you. Suit up." This is a guy didn't need to do this stuff. He didn't need to be going to work anymore. He didn't need to be fighting this fight every day to try to have this company survive. But that was really telling to me. It's like it puts it in perspective. Yeah, it's really stressful. Yeah, it's really painful to have a company fail, especially a company that had such visible success just a couple of years earlier. But they can't kill you and they can't eat you. Another in that was I really learned from Len, and it's part of my nature, is I just sort of fight to the end, whatever that is. It's not a false optimism. It's not a belief that everything needs to work. It's just, I'm willing to be in there till the very end of whatever the thing is. It's just my nature. It's atypical or less typical these days in venture capital. A lot of VCs, when something's not working, kind of punch out. Many don't, but some do. But sort of this idea of like, yeah, we're just in this together. Let's figure it out. Whatever it is, it's just another experience. And then maybe the last I'd say is I use Inner Alliance, probably the most painful experience I've had, but it's not the only big failure I've had. So it's not like, look at this one and then look at all these others. I've had plenty of successes, but there have been plenty of other things that didn't work. And the way I approach them now, as some of it I think is benefit of age, but a lot of it's thinking about it, is I view it as a journey with people rather than something that I'm being measured against.
Mm-hmm.
And the measurement that people make generally, even though there's a lot of external measurements, like, how good at this are you, or are you better at this than somebody else, or how much did you make, or how successful was this thing? Like, yeah, sure, that's part of our species. Like that's been going on from the beginning of our species. If you can sort of step away from that or step aside from it and say, you know what? Amy and I have a wonderful song. Courtney Love is uh, 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 who's the lead singer of a band called Hole, who's famous for her marriage to Kurt Cobain, but should be probably more famous for her music. Um, I love her music, and I'm how was I going to describe it? I'm stuck in my high school and college year music and grunge.
Everyone is.
Right,
Absolutely
right.
everyone.
Grunge is my music. So, grunge and Giants, stadium rock, AC/DC, and then rock operas like Rush and Pink Floyd, like that stuff is my stuff.
Awesome.
All right, so that's where I'm stuck. So, one of Courtney Love's song is called Doll Parts, and there's a line in Doll Parts, I want to be the girl with the most cake. And it's a joke in my family, which is whenever we encounter someone or something that's just kind of trying to collect all the marbles, we sort of joke with each other. I want to be the girl with the most cake. No, I want to be the girl with the most cake. No, I want to be with the girl. We're just making fun of ourselves. It's like, wait a second. Like, I don't know what the fitness scene in Victoria is. In Boulder, Colorado, no, I'm a long distance runner. No matter how good a long distance runner you is, there's always somebody better than you. No matter how good you are at this, there's always somebody better than you. So is the goal to be the girl with the most cake, or is the goal to just have an amazing experience? And I vote for number two. And the
Hmm.
amazing experience incorporates both the big ups and the big downs. And that's maybe the biggest lesson after some failure, which was when I was young and I failed at things, it was like, oh, what am I doing? How is, there's a lot of insecurity around it. There was, I was kind of accomplished a lot very young, so there's a lot of struggle with it. At this stage in life, you kind of look back and say, actually, was the experience the thing? And uh, I'll end with there's a cliche, right? The journey is a reward, and you hear that cliche all the time. I'm not sure that I agree with the cliche that much because a lot of the time the journey sucks. Um, but if you can step back from it and observe it and be the observer of your own experience, what was that experience? What did you get from that experience? And even the ones that are really painful, you can always get something from them.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. We've got a couple more questions before wrapping up today. For someone who's never formally mentored before, what's the best way to start practicing give first in their professional life?
My guess is if you haven't mentored before, you probably have, because the word mentor, which now is a label, is not a new construct, right? And really the essence of it is professionally what you're doing is you're showing up with experience. You're engaging with people who could be different types of experience than you, but less experience on some dimension. And on that dimension in which you have more experience than they do, you're supporting them. You're not, again, not telling them what to do, but helping them figure out how to solve their problem. If a lot of people that come up to me and say something like, will you be a mentor? And I'm like, there's not a formal, like,
Application.
there's no application, there's no card. It's a way of being, it's a way of engaging. And one of the really interesting things about it is um, this magic trick that I described where you become peer mentors, right? Len, as somebody who was 32, I think he was exactly 32 years older than me, or not exactly to the birthday, but that many years. Uh, I didn't genuflect before Len, my mentor, and say, Len, will you be my mentor? We just started doing stuff together. But, I listened really carefully and I learned a lot and I let him, guide me. And whenever he would let me participate in something, where I could learn, I was hungry for that. And then this peer mentor moment was, at a dinner where Len was describing to other people at the table how much he was learning from me. And that's the essence of it. The essence of it that you're learning from mentor-mentee dynamic. I think about another early mentor of mine, my dad's younger brother, a guy named I still call him Uncle Charlie. His name's Charlie Feld, and Charlie basically was one of a dozen or so people who created the idea of a chief information officer 40 or 50 years ago. Used to be called, for old people in the room, data processing or head of data processing. And then it was management information systems. And eventually the person in the C-suite that got that title was a CIO. And, when I was a teenager, I was being invited I was always interested in computers, and Charlie would invite me to things when I was in college. When he'd come to Boston, he would invite me to meetings that I had no business being in. And he didn't say, sit in the corner. See you, Sean. Thank you for joining. He didn't say, Brad, sit in the corner. What he did instead was he let me sit at the table And, I'd be very respectful and I wouldn't say much, but every now and then I'd have a question and I ask a question. Like being able to be in those places, that's a really powerful way to be a mentor, is being Charlie in those situations. Like inviting people into things where they can learn and they can experience.
I love that. Switching gears slightly, Boulder's done a great job creating density moments, those points where everyone in the community comes together and energy multiplies. We're trying to do the same thing here in Victoria with events like Discover Techtoria, which is a tech expo, the VIATEC Awards, the Lift Leadership Retreat, Prompt Victoria AI Conference, and yet to be announced, sneak peek, Victoria Tech Week. What are
Awesome.
the most effective ways you've seen smaller ecosystems keep those momentums going so the momentum doesn't fizzle out in between events?
Yeah, there's not a magic trick. I think you have to just keep doing stuff. And
Great.
uh, I think for me, the moment in Boulder where I realized that there was critical mass was when uh, there were more than one thing happening each day, so I couldn't go to everything. And the only way that happens is if you get a bunch of leaders and instigators who are leading things versus one or one organization trying to lead.
Hmm.
You just have to have a bunch of different people doing different things. And this is the idea of having, endless activities and events. They don't have to be big productions. They don't have to be, startup week type things. They could be simple meetups that happen once a month around a particular topic, or they could be a new group of people who decide, you know what, there's a fun thing that's been going on forever in Boulder, which is whenever somebody new comes to town, once a month, there's basically a newbie meetup. And it's, a bunch of people that have been around for a while that are, introducing Boulder to people that are new to town and getting them kind of the roadmap to what's going on. And, it's at a beer place and everybody has beer and hangs out.
And they're becoming natural mentors by doing that.
That's right. And they do it before the monthly. We have a new tech meetup in Boulder that's been going on for 20 something years. That's, structured a couple of hours and it usually 100, 150 people show up and they're different people each time because people present different things like that. Sometimes it's a little bit bigger, sometimes a little bit smaller. But this newbie meetup is just before, that's not what they call it. I don't know what they call it. But it's just before the new tech meetup. And so, you hang out for an hour with a bunch of new friends, and then you go and you're hanging out with 200 people at a new tech meetup. So it's just you you said, and if you said to me, Brad, who organizes those things? I don't know anymore, right? Because can you do
Yeah.
something for 20 something years? No, you hand it off to the next person. You don't have to control it. You don't have to hold on to it. You just let it become part of the community. But I don't think there's magic to it. I think it's doing and building. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with summer vacation. There's nothing wrong with taking some time off and having some things slow down. Like you don't have to overdo it all the
Hmm.
time. And so the rhythm from thing to thing is often actually quite helpful.
Yeah. That's fantastic. One more question before we wrap up today. You've written extensively about startup communities and mentorship. If you look 10 years ahead, what do you hope Give First will have changed about how entrepreneurs, investors, and communities interact 10
Um,
years ahead?
it's a good question. Nobody's asked me that yet. A decade from now, my hope is that the philosophy of Give First is more interwoven into the fabric of the way people talk about things in the same way today startup communities is. 15 years ago, the phrase didn't exist. Nobody called these things startup communities. The ideas of, leaders and feeders and instigators, and none of that language existed. And today it's very commonplace all over the world. So my hope is that some of the stuff from Give First around the philosophy of Give First, about how to be an effective mentor, some of these ideas stick. That's my hope.
Awesome. That's all the time we have for today. I know a huge thank you to Brad Feld for taking the time to spend with us and to all of you for tuning in. As a reminder, you will all be receiving a copy of Brad Feld's book and will be contacted soon about that. A copy of today's webinar will also be emailed to you, this recording. And for the questions that we didn't get to, I'll shoot them over to Brad's way if he has time in between traveling. he can answer those couple questions left over, and we'll include that in the follow-up email. Thank you so much, Brad. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks everybody for hanging in for an hour. Great to see y'all, and embrace topophilia in Victoria.
Yes, that's my new motto. Thank you so much.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.